I can't help but think about this topic because all I see is the sacred text being misused. I see this foundation, this thing called Christian nationalism emerging, and it's being pushed by the Heritage Foundation, which is being supported or promoted by these tech billionaires and these political leaders who are trying to reestablish our sacred text by picking and choosing the teachings of Jesus that they promote. And they're using the picked or the chosen scriptures in order to promote or rationalize the hate and the racism and the segregation and the division that they are creating in this country. I took a quick pause because I wanted to get the book. And though this video is talking specifically about Christian nationalism, it refers to all of the spiritual teachings that we have, because they're all being manipulated at this moment. See, religion and spirituality, it has the power to heal. It also has the power to be misused. And today in our society, religious text, religion, spirituality is being used to focus upon the vulnerable, to take advantage of personal insecurities and influencing individuals' lives, all for power and greed, while they're promoting hate and segregation and racism and all these other un-Christian, un-Muslim, un-Buddhist, un-Jewish type of ideologies. And there's a growing group of these religious leaders too that are standing behind the pulpit and they're claiming their righteousness. And let's not forget those in Washington who are standing up on the podium claiming righteousness while they're sowing division and harm within our society. I keep referring to them as individuals wearing sheep's clothing, because they're using religion as a weapon to marginalize and harm the weak and the vulnerable. They're justifying their oppressive policies all in the name of God, all in the name of religion, all in the name of spirituality. But there's a biblical reference to this. And again, I just mentioned it. It's the wolf in sheep's clothing. False prophets, those who use faith as a veneer for oppression. And these individuals, these people, they're pushing political agendas through the church. And the church is pushing their political agenda through their political counterparts as they spread hate speech and sow political division. I mean, look at it. They're putting upon a pedestal our nation's leader, calling him the second coming of Christ. He can do no wrong. They're able to justify his crimes against women, his crimes against children, his crimes against society. And they're also themselves justifying their own crimes, their own actions against women and children, while claiming to be pro-life. They sit here with their hands out and they're asking you for money in order to run their churches, but in reality they're buying their homes and flying their jets, spending time on private islands. The money they collect is not being passed on or used for the needy, but is filling the pockets, their pockets that are fueled by greed. And this rhetoric is specifically noted in the Christian nationalism movement, whose leaders hold the belief that America should be governed by a narrow, distorted version of Christianity that sets aside the true teachings of Jesus. Christian nationalism, it merges political identity with a selective form of religious identity that all claims, divine authority for man-made power. It rejects pluralism, demonizes outsiders, it equates dissent to heresy. And most concerning, though, is its distortion of the core Christian values. And again, I'm repeating myself, I know. They are promoting division and dominance. And we're finding that these individuals are primarily often white evangelicals that are enriching themselves, taking away benefits from the needy. They take, and they make it hard for small ministries like my own to sit here and ask for tidings in order to be able to support our missions. Because individuals are now beginning to see contributions to the church as abuse, as greed, as unnecessary. I mean, I read someplace, and you have to pardon me if I skip around. This is all off the cuff, but I read someplace that Jesus welcomed the outcast. But these Christian nationalists, they reject migrants, they reject asylum seekers, they reject the sick, they reject the weak and the elderly. And it seems that they read a different book. They hold a hatred toward the marginalized, even though Christ taught us love. But some religious organizations like Christian Nationalism, right, they're built upon conditional love. They use that conditional love to justify their cruelty while they're humanizing others. They're consolidating their religious power with political power. And these groups, well, as they become very embedded within the government, they're pushing hateful agendas through in order to be able to consolidate economic power and create a supremacist style policies. That's the Project 2025. And we see the effects of this, the shifts in religion and political power through the treatment of those in ICE custody, promoting violence against migrants, promoting violence against those who they deem unworthy, ostracizing groups like the LGBTQ plus communities, and they even support, killing of black protesters. They sit there and proudly in the church and in the Oval Office call immigrants alligator food. I'm still shocked. They're calling the LGBT communities child molesters and rapists, yet they're promoting and protecting someone who has been adjudicated as a rapist, who has allegations against him, 26, who is all over the Epstein files, is a suspected, and through his actions, kind of a confirmed pedophile. He's made comments about his daughter when she was 2, saying she has great legs, doesn't know what her breasts are going to look like. What kind of conversation is that to have about your own child? But the Christian nationalists are promoting him. I mean, they're protecting child molesters and rapists and criminals, and they find acceptance in the false narratives that they're spreading about other individuals, like the Haitian immigrants, saying that they're coming and eating your cats and dogs. How absurd is such a comment? But such religious organizations, they're using their growing power to be able to pressure this very weak new political regime in order to create these executive orders like the Ending Crime and Disorder in America initiative that directs the criminalization of the unhoused, the institutionalism of individuals with mental health disabilities, and to track those with substance abuse disorders. And the whole goal is to put them into slavery while removing them from the streets. We've seen this before. So instead of pushing for funding for services or supporting the vulnerable and the marginalized communities. We see religious organizations in growing numbers use hate speech, prioritizing control and power over selfless service. And their goals? Well, their goals is power. They're willing to incarcerate these individuals into for-profit institutions that force them into treatments that don't work, that do not solve the issues, and also use them as slave labor, paying them $1 a day. But they're also creating mechanisms that are meant to hide those they deem undesirable. And the bottom line, again, is meant to hide those who are not white. It's meant to hide those who are not straight. And it's meant to hide those that are deemed unworthy or unattractive. Well, creating mechanisms to be able to force them into slave labor in order to support the elite population's quest for economic and religious power. With all the migrants who usually harvest our food for us, who do you think is going to do that? Well, that company GEO that has these major prisons has already offered to put the prisoners that they have, which are the migrants, back into the fields for $1 a day. I went on a binge today, hence why I am injecting this video. I find it amazing that these groups are able to use hateful rhetoric and political influence to create fear and uncertainty, building pathways for the criminalization of our vulnerable, of our poor and marginalized communities, while they hide behind religious beliefs that they're rewriting to serve their purpose. Christian nationalism pushes obsession with power and control instead of servant leadership. And we see such authoritarianism justified by cherry-picked scriptures, all presented with a loud, dehumanizing voice from the pulpit. They're instilling fear instead of unity. And while doing so, they're pillaging from the poor, taking food away from the children, taking food and clothing away from the poor and marginalized, taking away medical care from millions of individuals, from the elderly to the newborn, making it difficult for tens of millions of Americans because it creates fear, and fear is power. And I can't help. I have to go back to the little book, and I have to talk about Matthew, when Jesus turned over the tables of the money collectors. He declared that his house is one of prayer, not a den of robbers. And that's what Christian nationalism has become. That's what this administration has become. See, Jesus stood against religious leaders who were corrupt. He stood up against religious leaders who were corrupted who corrupted faith for power. In Christian nationalism, though, we're seeing something more disturbing. They are corrupting religious faith for power, for money, while pushing a new ideology of racial supremacy that's masked as theology. And we are seeing white Christian nationalism now emerge, glorifying themselves as a modern version of Christianity, as they put in these models talking about, I've got blonde hair and blue eyes and great genes. Those words were used in the 1930s by a political leader in Germany. The churches are loud, and they spread hate and blame others for their failures, and demonize groups and turn their backs upon the poor, using their message to generate money off the weak and create a rhetoric that's used to cause fear. And the problem and this is how it falls into my series on Unveiling the Lie, when we have social media, when we have AI, selective censorship, the AI technologies that are manipulated by billionaires and political groups and organizations. It gives Organizations like the Christian Nationalism, it gives an incredible influence upon the people. It has a further reach to the people. And again, not all those who wave the Bible speak to God. Some will hold that book upside down. And, we could use this example because history is filled with such leaders. Leaders who have invoked God's name while committing acts of hatred, all on the path to solidify power and control over the masses. And we must remember that such teachings, they go against our spiritual text, all of them. Faith uplifts. Faith protects. Faith nurtures. Faith uplifts, protects, nurtures all people. It does not segregate or demonize based upon race, gender, or belief. That is a man-made influence. We can turn to any of our texts, all of our texts. All of our texts warn us not to follow leaders who lead with cruelty. The Torah, for example, tells us not to follow a crowd that is doing wrong. And in the Bible, we have multiple verses. We can start in Proverbs, which compares a wicked leader over the poor to a dangerous animal. Also warns us of leaders who create unjust laws that oppress the poor and the needy. And we can even thumb over to Matthew, where we are warned about false prophets who appear harmless, but who are inwardly destructive and cruel. So, as spiritually minded individuals, we must watch for signs of manipulation, such as sermons that are praising political leaders more than they are the moral principles of our faith. We must watch out for churches that silence anyone who questions or dissents. And we must watch out for messaging that scapegoats entire groups under the banner of truth or God. Jesus didn't go after the trans, he didn't go after the gays, he didn't go after the poor, he didn't go after the immigrant, he welcomed them all. But what we are seeing here is that faith has become a flag, faith has become a hat, and faith has become a forced belief. What has happened is freedom, and justice has now become optional. So we all have to make a choice. We all have to make a choice whether we're going to stay this path or we're going to return to our core values. Christianity is not about control. It's about compassion, humanity, humility, and truth. And it's up to each one of us to protect our sacred text from being weaponized. And when we've got to remember that when a church becomes a tool of propaganda, it no longer serves the kingdom of heaven. It serves the empire of man. And those who misuse the Bible for control, they often hide behind forgiveness, saying, "Oh, God will forgive me." Really? God's forgiveness is a gift. It's not a tool used to justify one's sins. It's not used to shield yourself from accountability. There's a growing misuse of God's grace, using it to mask or a mask to hide behind while they're promoting deceit or even protecting evil. Again, this is the modern version of the wolf in sheep's clothing. True repentance isn't saying that God will forgive me while I continue to sin. It's about turning away from sin entirely. Now, the last person I want to highlight or I want to talk about is Buddha, because the Buddha even teaches us that following a leader who leads in cruelty is not encouraged, as cruelty contradicts the principles of compassion and non-harming. See, Buddha kind of ties in with the other sacred text, and is a good indicator that all of our sacred texts, they all emphasize the importance of developing compassion and a loving kindness towards all beings. Our sacred texts emphasize that a cruel leader acts contrary to the fundamental principles of our faiths. All of our texts tell us not to follow leaders who lead with cruelty. But yet, some religious organizations, some churches have fallen into temptation and are now hypnotized by the wolf in sheep's clothing. So anyway, my name is Reverend Michael, and this is The Open Road. I hope the message kind of spoke to you and earned your subscription. Please remember to click the like button, the notification bell, and share it with others so we can grow this online ministry. Today, I wish you peace, and may you walk in peace and in clarity.